Hi guys, so today I'm back with a very exciting video, for me at least. So quite frankly, I'm not sure how this video is gonna go because it's difficult to talk about something you love so much, and it's kind of difficult for me to talk about this in English as French is my native language, as you probably all know. And as much as I feel very comfortable in English, it's still not as good as my French, especially when it comes to literary terms and expressing things as delicate and like little and precise as the writing of André Breton. So today I'm gonna talk to you about Nadja. Nadja is a book written by André Breton. André Breton was the leader of the surrealist movement. He was a very controversial figure, both because of his personality and also the way he acted in the surrealist circle. He had a very almost religious way of conducting it. He was very harsh, very strict. He excluded people from the movement, took them in, rejected very strongly things such as novels, and if you were to write a novel you would not be considered a surrealist anymore. He was also very keen on morality, which led him to criticize homosexuality, for example. He also had some pretty sexist opinions when it came to women. But I also just want to say, I personally think that, you have to put things back in their context. André Breton lived in an era and a time that are very different from ours. He went through things that were completely different, and his I think desire to create differently was also aimed in different trauma and expressed itself differently. I think that the reason why nowadays we can have, those progressive ideas and just think of creation and female creation and creativity in the way that we do is because people in the past, like him, did the things that they did. Now I don't want to excuse everything, because obviously even at that time and even in the surrealist circle there were people a lot more open-minded than André Breton. But I personally really value his work, and I think he's a very important persona in the literary world. And Nadja is to me a very important and just a very important book altogether. Just to give you an idea of how important it is, I have a tattoo here. This tattoo, I don't know if you can see, but it says Nadja. This tattoo is actually the drawing that Nadja did of herself. It is an auto-portrait sort of that she drew, and that's present in the book. And I decided to get this tattooed for many different reasons. Nadja is a book that I've been reading and rereading over the years. It's a book I always find myself coming back to because I think it's so unique. So the first thing that you have to know about Nadja is, first of all, I would suggest reading the Surrealist Manifesto before reading Nadja. It's not necessary, and it's not, you don't have to, but I think that putting things into context can be a bit more, can be a bit useful and can be a bit easier for some of you, especially if you're new to surrealism. I would definitely suggest doing that. Nadja is a very unique and unsettling book because quite, respectful to the surrealist ideology. It is not a novel, it is not a novella, it is not a short story, it is not poetry, and it's not only an autobiographical moment. It is a very interesting and innovative try, I think, at putting fiction and non-fiction, art and creation and documentation together to replace, I believe, beauty where the surrealist thought it should be. That means everywhere. I would say love was actually the end goal of surrealism, especially if you read L'Amour Fou or The Crazy Love. I don't know how it's translated, but L'Amour Fou de Breton, it is pretty clear. And if you read other poetry, the importance of beauty, the importance of women, it's always, and the importance of poetry and creation, it's always like directed towards love, like a big love, a capital letter. And I do believe that they used to think that beauty was just a form of love and an expression of love, and that it could be found everywhere. While surrealism, can be seen as problematic by some people, as I said, because of its homophobic sometimes, positions, and especially the way I would say the most problematic thing is obviously the way women are depicted, and just how women surrealists were not given the same space and the same recognition as as their male counterparts. I think that's definitely the most problematic part of surrealism. But I think it's just, if you are to consider only that, you're just missing out on so many things. Surrealism was so interesting and so creative and so strong and rebellious and courageous in the way they, portrayed and believed and just thought about creation, beauty, love, sexuality, even, and just even women as well. It's not all bad what they said and what they did about women. And also politics, the revolution. Surrealism was supposed to be a revolution in itself, and just also colonialism. I do believe it's a movement that has a lot to offer, and just refusing to read more about it, or refusing to dive into it because of how problematic it could be for some topics, I do believe it's a big shame. So Nadja is indeed a very interesting and unique book, as I said, trying to mix in together in this very natural, almost organic way, reality and art and creation, because they believe that it should not be distinguished and isolated like it has been for a long time in the literary tradition. So it's also interesting because it's text, and it's also pictures, and it's also art, and it's also drawings by Nadja herself, like this one, for example. So it's a very interesting book. That's also I would say it's also kind of like a testimony of an era. It has a lot of references to politics, and also a lot of mentions of great authors that Breton used to hang out with, like Aragon, for example, or Éluard. So if you're interested in French literature, especially of that era, it's definitely also an interesting piece of documentation in that sense. So Nadja is the title of the book, and it's also the character's name, the protagonist's name. But really you wonder quite quickly if she is really the protagonist, because she appears in the book quite late. She appears, I believe, page 71, which is, all of that is without Nadja. So she appears on the page 71 quite late in the book, and she's always described through the book as a mystical being, and it really is why, in a way, that's how you see definitely that surrealism was still objectifying women, even though they did it in a way that was different, I believe, personally. Nadja is never presented really as a real human being. She's this sort of mystical, magical woman who is used more so, I would say, by Breton to create and to access the surreal, the different, the beautiful, that is always bizarre, according to Baudelaire. I would say that the way I see it is that she is a catalyst of a very personal quest of Breton to create differently, to feel the creation and the art in everyday life. Nadja was a prostitute, she was a drug user, and she was also mentally ill. In fact, she ends up being locked in an asylum. A really important thing to mention, though, is that Nadja was a real woman. It's hard to say what's real, what's partly real, what's completely created out of the mind of Breton, but the fact that she was locked up in an asylum is probably very, very true, and she ended up dying there. So Breton did nothing to save her, which once again just aggravates the case and the theory of her being just a symbol, being just a representation, or being just an object, almost like a door. I think it's something that's very clear in surrealism. You always have this image of the woman being this access to someone else, it's not even being a muse. I believe women are still muses in a way, but they're more so just access to a different world, be it by knowing them, worshipping them, or even just having sex with them, because sexuality was very I think one point that's interesting in surrealism is the fact that sexuality was not necessarily frowned upon. Yes, Breton did not like gay sex and did not really understand the concept of women together, nor really giving pleasure to women that much. But you have access to files which are really interesting. It's those discussions, debates among surrealists on sexuality. It's quite interesting to see what they're into and what they think of different practices. It's quite interesting actually. But yeah, surrealism definitely did something great. It made it possible for women to free themselves from this duality of the virgin or the whore. Like, they're definitely neither one of those. They're complex beings that have at the same time those very pure, almost like angel sort of, touch and attitude, but they're also very sexual beings. They're also very mystical, mysterious beings that are in a way presented as higher than men. So Breton did nothing to save her, but he criticized very severely actually and very violently the asylums, and he said that asylums and doctors were the ones that killed Nadja. It's interesting though to ask oneself what part, if any, he took in her, dying or being locked up. That's very interesting. So while he advocated very strongly against asylums and against the way mentally ill people were treated at the time, he did nothing really to save her, which is a very sort of like upsetting thing, because when you read the book you're also tempted to follow Breton's perspective and consider Nadja as just a symbol, just a tool to access a different truth, a more creative vision of the world. And you tend to forget that she was just a real woman. You tend to forget that as well, because in the book she's clearly presented as someone who has powers. She can see and feel things that others can't see or can't feel, and Breton just relates them and writes them in a way that you don't really question the veracity of those things. I mean, you can obviously question them, but the way the book presents them to you, it's seen as a truth, as facts that happen. And Breton is himself very like surprised and like fascinated by the powers that she has, and she says things throughout the book like that are very mysterious, almost like prophecies, and just like those enigmas that you have to, make something out of those things. You have to understand what's the meaning behind that. It's a very mystical book in itself, while being also a very urban, very just almost, it's a very interesting mixture of something that's so mystical, almost religious, almost like, yeah, like I would say a medium or someone would come on earth, and you also have those very, very down-to-earth events and mentions of objects and letters and other writers. So it's a very interesting mix in my opinion. There's also a scene that's quite heartbreaking in the book, I would say, where they are in the car together and she kind of asks him or tries to kill him to commit suicide with him in a way, which for her would be, I guess, the expression of pure love. And Breton decides to keep on living, like he doesn't want to die with her. And I have the French version, so I'm sorry for that, but he says something along the lines of, what was she offering to me? Whatever. Only love, as I understand it, but the mysterious, the unique, improbable, the unquestionable love, such as it would not be questioned or tested, and I was never up to that. That's my own translation, just not prepared. So it's pretty clear, and it's heartbreaking, because on the side you have this writer, this poet, this thinker who's trying to access a different realm, and you have this woman who is clearly in love with him. And in the book it is said that she asked him to write a book about her. And it's kind of interesting, because if you were to be a little bit like trying to get into Breton's head and try to have his feelings, it's almost like this book is a way to redeem himself and to pay back the fact that he couldn't take care of her while she was in the asylum. But once again, it's kind of like saving her as a character, saving her as a person, not saving her as a human being, which is why this book is so interesting to me. And this is why I find myself coming back to this book so frequently, is because it's not beautiful in the traditional sense. It's not interesting in the traditional sense. You have nothing sensational, you have nothing dramatic, you have no real like adventure going on in that book. Even the style is not really beautiful. You have sentences and words and little dialogues which are interesting, beautiful, like almost sort of, yeah, magical, I would say, and really surreal, obviously. So you reread them, they make you feel something, they take you by surprise almost, but it's not beautiful in a traditional sense. Whereas some of his poetry, I would say, is more beautiful. But you always, I mean, personally, I always come back to the book because it's a never-ending read. Precisely because of that. It's a book you can't really fully understand, it's a book you can't really classify, it's a book you can't really grasp. That's why I love so much about surrealism. And it's also because who doesn't want to think? You know, when you start reading this, okay, you read that, you end up reading it, you put it back, and you go out in the street, especially me living in Paris. Who doesn't want to think there is something behind those people talking to themselves on the street? You know? Who doesn't want to think there is something hidden and something magical and something special behind, you know, whatever, your daily commutes to work with the metro or the train? Who doesn't want to think that a wall or a window is not only a window or a wall? Who doesn't want to think like that? I mean, personally, that's what I find so fascinating and almost invigorating and like just so full of life, of true life, violent, pure, raw life in surrealism. It's the fact that you look at things differently. It's like you're opening the air as you would do with curtains, and suddenly you're seeing things, the same things, but you're seeing them differently. And I have never found any other movement that's offering me the same creativity, the same inventivity, the same life, the same strength of life, the same possibility and the same desire to change things, to like shake things up. I've never found any other movement like that. Now, I'm not saying that surrealism is the best movement of all time. For me personally, I like it a lot. It's my favorite movement, but I totally understand. And I understand why. The reason why I'm making this video now is because I just watched Better Than Food book reviews. And I love his channel, by the way. And at the end of his review, he said that, you know, he couldn't dive anymore into surrealism as he did when he was younger. And that he grew out of it, sort of. So I'm only 26. And surrealism has been very important for me since I was like 16, so it's been 10 years and I haven't grown out of surrealism, so I don't know if it says something about me like being immature or something, but I just don't want to grow out of it. I just don't want to grow out of it. I'm sure and I understand very well that there is the part in surrealism that's on your side. You're constructing the illusion, you're constructing the fantasy, you're constructing the energy. You're participating in the creation of this wonderful hope. I do get it. But I think it's what's beautiful as well. I think it's what's important in life, and I do believe we're all trying to do that in a way or another. And personally, I like doing it with literature. I like reading books that make me want to create, that makes me look at the world differently. And often I found myself in situations where I've met people and they reminded me of Nadja. You know, I've met a few times women, and it's very sad. Like, I'm not saying, I don't want to say, oh yeah, very important, I don't want to sound like I'm objectifying those women. I met women on the street that were homeless and they were mentally ill. It was very obvious. And I tried to ask them, do you have a house? Do you want me to call maybe the police or a hospital or something? They always refused and rejected my offer. And I'm not someone who's gonna call the police or call the hospital or anything on someone who doesn't want that and who's not in immediate danger. But they exchanged with me, and the way they talk, the way they say things that apparently make no sense, but that perhaps make sense, and the fact that maybe they say those things because they see something, okay, that's not real, but that's still here because they see it. You know what I mean? You look at it differently. you definitely look at it differently. And I think it's very important to find the line between not objectifying those people and treating them as a way to create, as a way to be inspired, because they do suffer, and they also suffer because the world is not taking care of them and whatnot. But I think it's opening new ways to confront those ideas and those conditions and those concepts. Even just the question of prisons, Breton did fight against those. Yeah, I think it's just a very, like, you could talk about it for hours and hours, and I'm gonna stop because it's already 20 minutes in. So I could have talked about L'Amour Fou, which is my favorite book. Nadja is a very important book for me, but like, if you talk about favorite books by Breton, L'Amour Fou is definitely number one. It's amazing, you have to read it. The poetry by Breton is also wonderful and amazing, but I could just not fit everything into one video. So I will definitely, if you're interested, do another video on his poetry. But it's worth the read so much. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit different from what I usually do. I really hope you found it interesting. Obviously, I do not think that I know everything about Breton or everything about the book, and it's not an exhaustive and a complete video. It's just my personal take on it, and I chose to talk about certain things with my personal preferences. So keep that in mind. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, you can always support me on Patreon if you wish, with $1 a month. I post videos, chats, and pictures, and it's really helping with the channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye!